Her family told a story for generations. A Choctaw medicine man, a free man who chose love over safety, a great-great-grandfather who walked between two worlds and passed something ancient into the bloodline of the most famous musical family on earth. Janet Jackson grew up with that story. Her father told it. Her brothers repeated it. Her family wore it like an inheritance, proof of something proud, something free, something that could not be owned. DNA went looking for that man. What it found was something the family never knew, and something the system that produced it never wanted anyone to find at all. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. There are families who know exactly where they come from, and there are families who built a story because the truth had been taken from them, and a story, even an uncertain one, was better than silence. The Jackson family of Gary, Indiana, had a story. Joe Jackson told it in his memoir, published in German, one of the most detailed accounts of the family's origins ever recorded. He described a great-great-grandfather named July Gale. Nobody called him July, Joe wrote. Everyone called him Jack. Jack was born into the Choctaw Nation at the beginning of the 19th century. He was a shaman, a medicine man, respected for his healing knowledge, sought out by people who traveled long distances to receive his help. He was also a scout for the United States Army, a free man, a man who moved between two worlds that rarely intersected. And then Jack fell in love with a woman named Gina, an enslaved woman. In 1838, they had a son together. That son was named Israel. Because his mother was enslaved, Israel was enslaved too. That was the law. The father was free. The child was not. The boy grew up and people called him Nero, son of Jack. Nero Jackson. That name became the family name. That is how the Jacksons got their surname. Jermaine Jackson repeated this story publicly. Michael Jackson referenced it. The family's Native American heritage, specifically Choctaw on the paternal side and Blackfoot on the maternal side through Catherine's line, became one of the most consistent threads in every interview, every memoir, every family account the Jacksons ever gave. It was a story about a free man, about chosen love, about Native ancestry that distinguished the family from the standard American story of enslavement and erasure. It gave the Jacksons something very few Black American families from the Deep South could claim, a name-free ancestor at the beginning of the line, not a slave number on a census schedule, not an unnamed person valued in dollars alongside cattle, a man with a tribe, a man with skills, a man who chose. It was a story that explained the high cheekbones, the light skin on certain family members, the healing knowledge Nero carried, the old military dances he performed after emancipation while neighbors gathered to watch, the medicines he sold, the way he seemed to carry something that felt older than slavery, older than Gary, Indiana, older than the two-bedroom house on Jackson Street. It was also, DNA would eventually confirm, a story built on something other than what it claimed, not a lie, not an invention made in malice, a confluence of things, physical features misread across generations, family pride preserving what it could, and the deep human need to find a free ancestor somewhere in a history that offered very few of them. To understand why the Jackson family carried this story and why millions of Black American families carry similar ones, you have to understand what was done to the historical record. The 1870 United States Census was the first federal census to record every American by name. Before that year, enslaved people were not recorded as people. They were recorded as property. Numbers on a slave schedule, ages and genders listed alongside livestock, farm tools, and land value. No names, no families, no origins. That is the wall. Not a metaphor, a structural historical fact. Before 1870, for the overwhelming majority of Black American families whose roots trace to the antebellum South, the official record stops completely. Not because the people did not exist, They existed, they labored, they loved, they had children, but because the system that held them had no interest in recording them as human beings with lineages worth preserving. When slavery ended, the newly freed entered the census by name for the first time. 1870. A paper trail begins, but everything before it, the specific ethnic group in West Africa, the village, the language, the family structure, the name given at birth, was gone, deliberately and permanently erased. Every Black American family that traces its roots to the antebellum South hits this wall eventually. Genealogists call it the 1870 brick wall. Researchers have spent decades developing tools to push through it. Freedmen's Bureau records, plantation estate documents, probate records, slave schedules that list numbers without names. But for most families, the wall holds. What came before it remains in the dark. This is why the Jackson family story about Jack Gale matters so much. It was an answer to the silence, a free ancestor, a man with a name, a tribe, a skill, a documented existence as something other than property, planted at the very beginning of the family line. The story filled a void that the historical record refused to fill. And when families carry a story like that for long enough, 5 generations, 6 generations, a century and more, it becomes truth, not deception, truth. The kind of truth that belongs to lived memory rather than documentary evidence. The kind that children grow up believing because their parents believed it, and nobody alive had any reason to question it. The DNA had no interest in lived memory. The DNA had only one question: what does the evidence actually say? The research into the Jackson family paternal line began not with Janet and not with Michael, but with a man named Thomas Jackson III. Thomas Jackson started the work that would change the family story. Thomas is a direct male descendant of Nero Jackson, the same Nero whose father the family believed was the Choctaw shaman Jack Gale. That direct male descent matters for one specific reason: the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome passes from father to son nearly unchanged across every generation. It does not mix with the mother's DNA the way autosomal chromosomes do. It travels the paternal line like a sealed record, grandfather to son to grandson, carrying markers traceable back hundreds of years. Mutations accumulate slowly and predictably, allowing geneticists to group Y chromosomes into haplogroups, branches on the human family tree corresponding to specific ancestral populations and geographic origins. If Jack Gale was truly a Choctaw man, Thomas's Y chromosome should carry Native American markers, specifically haplogroups associated with the indigenous peoples of the southeastern United States, populations with deep roots in the Mississippi River Valley going back more than 1,000 years before European contact. Those haplogroups are well characterized. Geneticists know exactly what they look like. Thomas tested first with an autosomal DNA service and received a preliminary haplogroup designation of RL20. He began researching, and he found something unexpected: a Richborg descendant carrying the same branch of the same haplogroup. RL was not showing Native American signatures. Not a Native American, a descendant of the Richborg family of Sumter County, South Carolina, a French Huguenot family. Thomas contacted the Richborg descendant. The genealogical records pointed in the same direction the DNA was pointing. And then, to eliminate every possibility of error, Thomas upgraded to the Big Y700 test through Family Tree DNA, the most comprehensive Y chromosome test available, resolving haplogroup branches to the finest level currently possible. Big Y confirmed what the preliminary results suggested. The results were unambiguous. Thomas Jackson III and the Richborg descendant shared a terminal SMP, a specific unique genetic marker designated RFT 121435. The family tree DNA discovered Time Tree placed their common ancestor before 1750 with a French flag marking the origin point. Not a Choctaw tribal flag, a French flag. The paper record, once the DNA pointed the way, told the rest of the story. The Jackson family's paternal line begins not with a free Choctaw medicine man. It begins on a plantation in Sumter County, South Carolina, owned by a man named James Joel Richborg. James Joel Richebourg was a descendant of Claude Philippe de Richebourg, a French Huguenot who immigrated to South Carolina in the late 17th century, fleeing religious persecution in France. The Richebourgs settled in the Carolina Lowcountry, built wealth, and became part of the plantation economy that defined the region for nearly 200 years. They were slaveholders, part of the antebellum South structure in every sense. In 1804, James Joel Richebourg wrote his will. In that will, he listed his property, land, livestock, household items, and enslaved people, among them a man named July. July was not a free man in 1804. He was property listed in a legal document alongside everything else Richebourg owned. When Richebourg died, he bequeathed July to his daughter Mary. Mary married Josiah Gale III. July went with her to Mississippi, not by choice, but by transfer, by inheritance, by the terms of a dead man's will. An inventory of Josiah Gale's estate from 1828 lists July again, with a dollar value beside his name. 24 years after being bequeathed like furniture, July was still being valued in dollars. July took the surname Gale. As enslaved people commonly took the surnames of those who held them, he became July Gale, Jack Gale. The family would later call him Jack Gale, a slight variation across generations of oral transmission, but the same man. The DNA confirmed what the documents recorded. July's Y chromosome matched not to the indigenous peoples of the Mississippi Valley, but to the Richebourg family of South Carolina. French descent, plantation descent, the most probable explanation, consistent with both the genetic evidence and the documentary record, is that July was the biological son of James Joel Richebourg himself, not the child of a Choctaw man and an enslaved woman, the child of an enslaver and an enslaved woman named Rose, who also lived on the Richebourg plantation. The man bequeathed in a will was the son of the man who wrote it. That is not a story the family was ever told, because that is not a story anyone in a position to tell it had any reason to share. Here is what matters most about this discovery, not the correction of a genealogical detail, something deeper. The family story about Jack Gale was not random. It was not invented out of nothing. It was built around things that were genuinely real. July Gale was known for healing. He sold medicines after emancipation. He performed what witnesses described as military dances, movements that carried something older, something that did not feel entirely like the Black American traditions of the post-Civil War South. His son Nero had high cheekbones and light skin. His daughter-in-law Emmeline Williams was described consistently as three-quarters Choctaw Indian. The family lived near what Joe Jackson later described as old Indian towns, and they walked the trails. These were real things, real features, real skills, real geography, but the explanation the family built around them was shaped by need, not documentary accuracy. In the post-slavery South, a person's legal and social status depended heavily on how they were classified. Native American ancestry carried different standing than Black ancestry in certain legal contexts. The story of a free Choctaw grandfather was not just family pride. For families navigating the brutal racial hierarchy of the late 19th and early 20th century South, stories like this were sometimes survival strategies, ways of claiming a status the system was designed to deny. The Choctaw story protected something. It replaced the most painful possible answer, that July's light features, his healing knowledge, his proximity to the white family that owned him, all traced back to the plantation itself, with something more bearable, a free man who chose love, a shaman who carried ancient knowledge, not an enslaver who fathered a child with an enslaved woman and then passed that child to his daughter in a legal document. The DNA did not destroy the family story. It revealed what the story was carrying. Janet Jackson inherited this paternal story from her father, but she also inherited something else entirely from her mother's side, a completely separate line, a completely different history. Katherine Jackson, born Caddy B. Screws in Barber County, Alabama, in 1930 carried an ancestral line that had nothing to do with South Carolina or French Huguenot planters. Her maternal line through the Upshaw family of Russell County, Alabama, traces back through 5 generations of Deep South Black Belt roots, cotton country, slavery territory, families who were on that land as property before the Civil War, and as sharecroppers long after it ended. Her grandfather, Prince Screws Sr., was born into slavery on an Alabama plantation. His existence before emancipation is recorded not as a person, but as a number on a slave schedule. That was the wall on Katherine's side, just as it was on Joe's. Before 1870, nothing. After it, the slow reconstruction of a family line from fragments. The mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line passed unchanged from mother to daughter across every generation, tells a completely different story than the Y chromosome, where the paternal line traces back to a French plantation owner in South Carolina. The maternal line traces back to West and Central Africa, to populations that existed in that region long before the slave trade, long before European contact, long before the political borders now dividing the continent were drawn. These are among the oldest continuously inhabited territories on Earth. The maternal haplogroups tracing back to sub-Saharan Africa are not the branches of the human family tree. They are the roots. Africa is where the human species originated. The mitochondrial lines running through West African populations connect to the deepest human ancestry available to any living person. Janet Jackson sits at the confluence of both lines. On her father's side, a French Huguenot plantation family, an enslaved woman named Rose, a will written in 1804. On her mother's side, ancient West African roots, Alabama slavery, a grandmother who contracted polio at age 2, walked with a limp her entire life, wanted to be a country singer, and raised 9 children in a 2-bedroom house who changed the world. Neither line is simple, neither line is clean, both of them are true. What happened to the Jackson family story is not unique to the Jacksons. Across the American South, an extraordinary number of black families carry stories with the same shape: a Cherokee grandmother, a Choctaw great-grandfather, native blood somewhere in the line, passed down with pride, with quiet uncertainty, or simply as the first thing a person says when someone asks where they come from. DNA testing has, in case after case, found no corresponding Native American markers. Not because the families are dishonest, because the story arrived as an explanation for something real. Lighter skin, straighter hair, higher cheekbones, features that entered black families through the plantation era encounter between enslaved women and the men who owned or oversaw them were for generations too painful to name directly. The violence that produced those features was not recognized as violence by the law. The victims were property. The fathers were not named. The children were not acknowledged. The record was designed to make the transaction invisible. Native ancestry offered a more dignified explanation: a free ancestor, a chosen union, a heritage that was the product of love rather than what the system permitted powerful men to do without consequence. The story became true in the telling, passed down across 100 years of family memory until it was simply who you were. The science is probabilities, not absolutes. It cannot eliminate the possibility of some indigenous ancestry elsewhere in the Jackson line. Emmeline Williams was described consistently as 3/4 Choctaw, and that claim has never been DNA tested. Science admits its limits. That admission is not weakness. It is what makes the results trustworthy. What the Y-DNA evidence establishes clearly is this: the man at the beginning of the Jackson paternal line was not a free Choctaw shaman. He was an enslaved man on a French Huguenot plantation in South Carolina, listed in a will in 1804, valued in dollars in 1828. His father, the DNA says, was the man who owned him. That is not the story the family was told, but it is the story the impartial form recovered. Here is what the DNA confirmed about Janet Jackson's ancestry. On her father's side, a lineage that begins not in a Choctaw village, but on a South Carolina plantation. An enslaved man named July, bequeathed in a will in 1804. a Y chromosome matching not to indigenous America but to French Huguenot descent, a family story built around what the physical evidence seemed to show: light skin, healing knowledge, military dances, without access to the deeper truth of where those things came from. On her mother's side, West African roots carried through Alabama slavery, through the Great Migration, through a 2-bedroom house in Gary, Indiana, through Katherine Jackson's quiet and unbreakable maternal line that no document fully recorded and no system fully erased. The family story about Jack Gale did not fail them. It carried them. It gave Nero's descendants a free ancestor in an era when free ancestors were the rarest and most precious things a Black American family could claim. It answered the silence when the silence was otherwise total. The DNA took that story apart, carefully, without malice, the way science always does, following evidence wherever it leads, regardless of what it costs. The Big Y700 test does not know what a story means to a family. It knows only what the markers say. Science resolved the question of July's paternal origin. It cannot resolve what the family should feel about that resolution. It cannot weigh the cost of replacing a story that protected something with a truth that exposes it. It cannot tell Janet Jackson or her siblings or the millions of Black American families who carry a similar story what to do with the knowledge that the free ancestor at the beginning of their line was not free at all. The genome tells one story, the family told another. Both of them carry something real. DNA reveals origin. It does not determine what that origin means to the people who carry it. It does not measure what was survived. It does not account for the cost of building an identity out of the only materials history left behind. And here's the question: no haplogroup, no will, no plantation record, and no Big Y700 result can answer when a family builds a story around a free ancestor because the true ancestor was not free, and that story carries them through 100 years of survival, through poverty and racism, and the full weight of American history. Does the truth owe them something? Or does the story? Leave your answer in the comments.